A common feature of charts like this is the inclusion of grid lines in order to make the chart more readable. We'll add grid lines to the y-axis so that the lines appear at the start of the y-axis and then continue horizontally across the screen. This will help us to place a little more easily the tops of the bars with the values on the y-axis. Let's take a look at the code, and we'll scroll down to the creation of the x and y axis, and that's here at lines 48 and 51. Now, there are lots of different ways that we could create grid lines. We could just create lines and add them in the same way that we added the bars within the plot function. But we're going to add them in a way that utilizes the y-axis because they really are an extension of the y-axis. So we'll head to the code just after the creation of the y-axis, create a new line, and type the following: var y gridlines equals d3.svg.axis, and then open and close parentheses. Now you might be saying, well, wait a minute, we already have a y-axis. Well, what we're going to do is create another y-axis that won't have any axis label information, but instead it will use the same scale and be oriented in the same place as the current y-axis. This gives us the benefit of being able to seamlessly line up both the axis and the grid lines. So now we'll use the same scale for this, dot scale, and we'll pass the y scale in, and then we'll orient it at the left, dot orient and left. There's a few other things that we're going to do. You see, axes can be modified using a few different methods within D3. So just before the orienting of the axis to the left, and before is a matter of style, you could actually do this after, so long as you did it before the semicolon, because this is all part of one statement. Create a new line, and I'll type dot tick size and open and close parentheses. We'll use the tick size method to adjust the ticks for this particular axis. Now remember, we're using this axis as grid lines. So the first argument is the width. We'll want the ticks to go from left to right. By default, they go from right to left. So we're going to use negative width. And so this will help to draw them in the opposite direction. And we won't affect the second and third parameters, so we'll set them to 0. Now in a new line, we'll type .tick format and open and close parentheses. Now the tick format method sets the format of the labels to display on the axis. Well, we don't want any labels to display, so we'll just open and close an empty string. Okay, now we need to actually add this to our chart. So let's go to the plot function, and just before the creation of the first bar, we will add the grid lines. And this is so that the grid lines are added first, and then everything else is drawn on top of them. So new line, this.append g, so we're appending a group to the chart. Let's call the new grid lines, which is y grid lines. Now that we've called the grid lines, we'll class them, .classed, and we'll class them as grid line, so singular, and we'll set that to true to make sure the class is applied. Finally, we'll add a transform attribute, but we won't actually set it. Instead, we'll have it ready should we want to adjust the grid lines later. .attr, then transform, comma, and translate with parentheses and 0, 0 in the parentheses. Okay, let's save it and head to the chart and refresh, and I'm not seeing any grid lines. We need to actually style the grid lines so that they'll appear. You see, we won't see any labels at the left because we entered a format that's an empty string. And the grid lines won't appear unless we properly style them. So let's head back to the code and head to main.css. Now we'll head to the bottom of the main.css file and we'll type .gridline, singular, path, comma, and new line, .gridline, space, line. So any path or line within a gridline classed element, do the following. We'll set a fill to none. And we'll set a stroke to be a light gray, so hashtag CCC. Since we're dealing with a line, we'll include the crisp edges shape rendering. So I copy that from the axis and paste here within gridline. Save it, head to the code and refresh, and now we can see our grid lines extending from the y-axis. The y-axis is one SVG item in a group, and the grid lines is another. If you wanted to create grid lines for the x-axis, you'd essentially do the same thing. You'd create a new variable that had a new axis, you'd hide the formatting, and you'd use the same scale. And then finally, you'd style the grid line according to your tastes.